In this introductory Photoshop demonstration, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history brush versus the art history brush. These tools can be found together in your toolbar, and if you click and toggle, you can see the history brush and the art history brush tool side by side. The history brush tool is really cool. It's kind of like having various levels of undo to a previous state by using a brush, which means that you can go back to that previous state in certain sections of an image simply by using the brush, the history brush, to bring out that previous state. So we're going to make several adjustments in an image. And then I'm going to retrieve a previous state of one of those elements in the picture plane using the history brush. And then finally we'll talk about the art history brush and the various brush styles that are available to you. So let's take a look at an image. Now here's an image that could benefit from a couple of things. It could probably have a little more dramatic shadows and contrast in the mountains, and maybe a little bit more dramatic shadows here caused by the late afternoon sun hitting the trees to our left. So let's say that that was our goal, and as you can see, I've got various layers already prepared for you. But let's just duplicate this layer and go through these steps, making that copy. Let's say I wanted to increase the saturation of the colors because it seems a little washed out to me. So I'm going to go under Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and using my preview selected, I'm going to increase the saturation in this image and pump those colors up a little bit. So I've done that here. You can see the saturation is increased. Now I want to increase the contrast, especially in the mountain area, to increase or add more drama to the shadows of the mountains. So I can do that by going Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And I can pump up the contrast in this image and maybe make it just a little less bright to add to the drama. And I'm just bringing a little bit more dramatic blue shadows, just so you can see more contrast in those mountains. So I've done that here, hit OK. So now we've increased the contrast, and here's our image. Now after I've done that, what if I look at this image and I go, wow, that really helped pump up the contrast and color in the mountains, but wow, it's really made this cloud look a little too blue. I may have too much saturation or color in the clouds, and they no longer look believable. So I can use my history brush tool to return it to the most recent state in history. If we pull up our history panel, and we have increased the contrast there, turn this off and make that our most recent action. Once again, Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. So I'm going to bump up the contrast and hit OK. And now I can use my history brush to pull back or return the clouds to their most recent state, where they didn't have so much saturated blues and grays. It almost looked too much like a storm cloud, and that's not really the mood that we're trying to project here. So as I click and hold, I'm using the history brush to return the clouds to their previous state. And I can change the size and relative hardness of this brush as I want to get closer into the details of the clouds without doing anything dramatic or weird to the trees or the mountains. So the history brush is a really cool tool because it allows you to selectively return portions of the image to their previous state. Okay, so here we are with the image now to its current state. And if I turn that layer off and on, let me just move the layers panel so you can see the difference in the cloud. And you may or may not be able to see the difference that much on your screen, but you can see how it looks more like a storm cloud. It's a little bit yellow, it's very gray, and using the history brush we kind of brought that cloud back to its original status. Now the art history brush is very interesting because it attempts to mimic periods of time in art history, like an era in which pointillism was in favor, or the Impressionist era. So if I click and hold and choose my art history brush tool, I can select from a variety of art history brushes, like the Impressionist brush that I mentioned, or oil painting, or pointillism, or even using the palette knife technique. So let's just say I have the pointillism brush selected. And I can also adjust the size of this brush, and notice again how my cursor changes, reflecting the size of the brush I select. And since we have the pointillism brush, it's going to attempt to revise this image using hundreds of thousands of little tiny pointed brush strokes. Or I can make them a little bit larger so that it'll be easy for you to see. And now as I run my brush over this image, it attempts to mimic the pointillism style. So it's a really unique and somewhat bizarre brush that Photoshop provides. And you can get some really interesting painterly effects by using the art history brush without actually having to take the time to build this image with hundreds of thousands of tiny brush strokes yourself. So it's a bit like cheating, I would say, in the pointillism realm. And so you don't have to watch me do this in its entirety. You can see kind of how the finished pointillist version would look, or if I used the impressionist brush. Here's kind of an impressionism version of the same image. Now if in this drop-down menu on your tool options bar you don't have these brushes available to you, you probably have to append the current brushes. And you can do this by click and hold this little arrow button. And you can scroll down to Art History. And when it asks you to replace current tool presets with the tool presets from Art History, choose Append. And it'll add a list of art history brushes for you to play with. And this concludes your introduction to the art history brush and the history brush tool.